Hello my friends, welcome to another video. I've mentioned a few times that I wanted to have kind of a staple inventory setup, almost like a market minimum, if you will. I don't know if that's a weird thing. I know a lot of people will make a checklist of like, I want to bring X many axolotls, X many frogs, whatever it is. But I kind of wanted to approach it in a slightly different way, so I thought I would share that with you. I wanted to do this little exercise for a couple of different reasons. Primarily to come out of it with a list of things I need to make to get ready for this first spring market, but also just to kind of reevaluate things that I've made in the past and make some decisions, because there were things that I made that may have sold well, but I just didn't like them, or, things that I didn't take the time to make that I wish I had more of. While I'm normally a very data-driven person, in this instance, when it comes to like what I'm bringing to market, I don't want it to be because of the data. I want it to be because it's what I want to put out there. I want to be passionate about what I make, whether or not it may sell as well as other things. So it kind of was just something where I could take a look, evaluate what's sold in the past, what I've made in the past, and what I want to make for the future. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm not going to try new things. I plan on buying more patterns, of course, and trying different makes, and maybe even revisiting some things that I didn't think I enjoyed. Snakes are a perfect example of that. I told you guys before, I made one snake back before my other markets, and I did not enjoy it. But most recently, I made that pattern by Zazulia, and I really enjoyed those, and I was good with making a batch of those. So snakes are kind of back in the game. So this kind of served a lot of different purposes for me, of just kind of getting me thinking about what I want on my table. I decided to approach this like I would if it were a project on my job, for example. So I took a step back and started with a mind map. I wanted to come up with 5 terms that I would say I want to best describe my inventory. This is something that I would definitely recommend to anybody out there who's either new to this or maybe has been doing it for a while and your inventory has gone awry from what your original thoughts were. It just gives you the opportunity to think about what you want out there for your brand. Here's what I came up with. Enchanted, of course. Forest/nature. Whimsical and fun. Witchy and magical. And then unique. Then I thought about my tablescape, and I want my tablescape to feel like an experience. I don't want it to feel like a shop. The best way I can think to describe it is like if you go to a theme park that has themed lands. So if you were to go to a theme park that has like the Wizarding World of Harry Potter, for example, when you walk in, you feel kind of immersed. And yes, you're looking at merchandise, you're looking at things to buy, but they feel like they're in areas that have a purpose, and they're often displayed in unique ways that kind of just tie into the overall theme. So I started to look at how I've been presenting that in my tablescape, and I want to make some changes to that. And this isn't necessarily in the order that things go. I still have to kind of revisit where I'm setting what, but this is just to kind of give you an idea of my thought process. I started thinking through each of the fixtures that I already own and kind of the vibe and feeling I want for the area that they represent. So for example, I have that round shelved item that I often refer to as my toadstool area. It's got the moss on top of it. And for me, that feels almost like a wet, dark, almost swampy area. So that's where I plan on predominantly displaying things like my mushrooms, maybe reptiles and insects and amphibians, axolotls and things. So it's kind of that whole feeling in that area that can also blend into maybe the area where I put out the rodents, which could also then just start to blend naturally into things like the opossums and the raccoons and foxes and like kind of the forest friends and things like that. And then I thought about, my tuxedo shelf, and that's where I keep my wisps. And that feels kind of like a in the trees enchanted area. So I can have my otherworldly creatures like my cryptids and goblins and monsters and forest spirits. I also want to kind of blend into a cozy area where I can have cats and dogs and maybe the familiars, if you will, where there still could be some magical touches there, but it's kind of like just the more common animals. I also have that thing that I had been referring to as a chicken coop. And, as we've discussed before, I'm not the biggest fan of like the whole Mabel chicken thing, so I won't be making any of those. If you know of any unique chicken patterns, let me know. I did pick one up that I might try, but for now, I at least want to keep that area as kind of like an aviary area. So I do want to still have things like ravens and owls, the little cardinal that I made. And then that can kind of lend into the square shelves that I have that are kind of, to me, like my mountain area. And I want to zhuzh those up a little bit with some art to see if I can make it feel that way a little more. But that's where I would display like my dragons, and I could see the little shelf dragon, you know, peering over the edge, looking down. So that's kind of the vibe that I want for that area. And then I also have some things that are just kind of structured stuff, like my minis bin, and then by my checkout area, I keep my mystery boxes and things like that. But it just kind of gave me some you know, food for thought on how I want each of those areas to feel and what sort of makes would go in those areas. And running through that was really helpful for me because it gave me a picture of kind of what I envisioned seeing on the table, which ties into obviously what I need to make for the table. Then it was time to dive into the specifics. So I started taking a look at my past sales, you know, what I brought, what sold, and then I did a full export from Square of every item that I have in there. This was pretty eye-opening for me because I realized that my Square inventory is a little messier and less categorized and organized than I would like it. But I'm not going to worry about fixing that right at this moment. Unfortunately, that's a pretty manual process, especially, or at least in the free version. I don't know in the paid version, but you can't just kind of move things around in there. So I'm not going to deal with that right now. I'm going to focus on what I need to make for this first market. What I did was took that list and then I took a quick peek at all of the new patterns that I have purchased that I knew I specifically wanted to make for the market. So I could add those items as if they were items in my inventory, although they haven't made it there yet. And then what I did was I added some columns to the spreadsheet. The first one I added was market minimum. And what this is going to be for me is regardless of the theme of the market. So not the spring market, not the Halloween market, not the fall market, just staple items that I want to have at every market. How many at a minimum do I want to bring? So an example of that might be like mushy pops. I want to bring 5 mushy pops to every market. Then I did a quick calculated column, which basically says if I want to bring 5 as my market minimum and I already have 3 on hand, that would lead me to need to make 2 to be ready for the first market. Then I did a couple of quick calculating columns because I just wanted to see where I was at in the overall big picture. I always like to keep an eye on the big picture while focusing on the small details that need to be addressed. So I did a quick total inventory column. And what that is like if I want to have 5 mushy pops at my market and I have 3 markets, then I would want to have at least 15 mushy pops total made before, you know, the end of those markets. So while I don't necessarily need to bring 15 to this first market, I only need to bring 5. My total would be 15. And this is just giving me an idea for something. So like, for example, I made a bunch of rats, so maybe I won't need to make them until a couple markets in. Again, I'm going to focus solely on the first market and what I need for that market. And then I have a larger block of time between that one and the last 2 that I'll make the rest for. Then I added a couple quick columns for each market. So the spring market, the Halloween market, and the fall market. And the reason I did that is because there are some things that I don't consider my staple items. So maybe an example of that would be like pumpkin spider poppers or something that are for Halloween. And I do want to bring them for the Halloween market, but my normal, you know, make for every market is a 0 because I'm not going to bring that to the spring market. So that's just to kind of highlight for me the things that I need to make sure are on my checklist to make when the time comes to prep for that market. I also added a quick column for the area of the table that things go into. So those areas that I talked about earlier, as far as like the toadstool area and maybe the mountainscape area, this way I could kind of start getting some counts and ideas of how balanced things are going to look on the table, as well as kind of where I need to focus more on. I also added a column for notes for myself to go back and fix the Square inventory. I figured I'm going through the inventory, these things are bothering me, I'm going to make a quick note to self. So when I do have time to sit down at the computer and clean up the Square inventory, I know what I need to do and I don't have to go through the whole inventory again. I also added at the very bottom a line item for showstopper, and that was just to remind me to be sure to make and bring a showstopper to each market. And that brought me to a staple inventory that I'm pretty happy about. Like I said, more patterns will come and more items will be added, but it at least gives me an area of focus, especially for this first market. market to kind of go through and figure out what I need to make. I'm not going to go through each item with you. What I do with my market recaps, if you haven't seen them, is I will go through every item that I brought, how many and how many sold. So we'll cover all of the details then, as well as I show you each week what I made, which is obviously going to market. But I thought I would run through some of those bucketed categories with you to show you how much I need to make before this first market. So obviously I have one showstopper. For aviary, I have 7 items I want to make. For that kind of cozy critter area, I have 6. For my forest friends, I have 11. For that mountainscape area, I have 6. My otherworldly creatures, I have 5. Rodents, I have 4. Plants is a category we didn't discuss, but I do want to make 3 more plants. I have those kind of potted plants and I want to have a little area for those. And then in my toadstool area, which is the biggest area, I have 16. Now I will say a lot of the toadstool makes are a little smaller, so things like insects and stuff like that. So that kind of makes sense to me as to why that number is higher. These numbers do not include things I already have. These are just how many I need to make. So for example, the rodent count is only 4. That's because I only need to make 4 more rodents. I have a ton of rats already, so I don't need to make any more of those. But in total, that is 59 items, and that is not counting my minis. I usually have 7 different animals that I make 10 of each of, so 70 minis to bring to market. I'm not sure if I'm going to shoot for that same amount. What I'm doing as far as prioritizing things is I am looking at items that I already maybe have a few of, and those go to the bottom of the list. So for example, we'll use mushy pops again because we've done that a bunch of times. If I want to bring 5 to the market, but I already have 3, that's going to be later on the list of weeks where I go make things. I'm going to focus on the things that I have 0 of that I need to at least bring some of first. That way I get those made. The other thing I did to prioritize was I kind of looked at the different price points. So the great thing about Excel is if you know how, you can pivot things. So I did some pivoting to make sure that I have a good spread of price point items available. So if I need to make more items that fall in that $10 to $15 range, then those are going to be higher on the priority list of makes, as well as just what I feel like making. I'm not going to bottle myself into a price category or an area of the table if I don't feel like making it. I'm not going to do that again this year. I'm going to have fun with this, and hopefully I will have a great tablescape that everyone loves. With all of that being said, I was in the mood for hitting that toadstool area, so that's what I focused on this week. So let me show you this week's makes. I started off this week's makes with the pattern called Mushroom Boy by Darby's Crochet Corner, and I made 2 of those this week. So these are these little kind of, I always referred to them as mushroom dolls, and they've got their kind of popping hats here. The eyes are hand painted, but not by myself. I got these both of these from Christine from What's Up Cupcake. I bought her Wicked collection. One of these is Wicked and one of these is the Emerald City. I don't remember which one is which, but they're both gorgeous. So these guys are set here. This one with his red hat. And then I did one with kind of this burnt orange color, rust color hat. Again, popping and gorgeous eyes here. So these came out super cute. What's great about these guys is they sit nicely themselves, and people love the fact that they have the popping hat. These 2 guys were made with Bernat Blanket and Bernat Baby Blanket. I believe it's vintage white, and then I don't know the color of this rust color or the red now that I think about it. And these were both made with a 6mm hook. When it comes to these guys, the pattern is not the quickest thing in the world. There's a lot of parts to this. So you're crocheting the feet, you're crocheting the arms, this little frill, the hat is separate, the head and body are together as one, but then you're sewing this stuff on and sewing on the mushroom top. So there's a good bit of sewing. These do take a fair bit of time. One of the things that I love the look of is a mushy boy, but I don't love the fact that the hat doesn't do anything. I find that people will see the mushy pops and play with them. They'll see these guys, and then they go to that middle size, like more affordable size, and then they're like, oh, it doesn't do anything. So I wanted to try to see if I could find something that had a little bit of that functionality. So I got a pattern called Mushroom Friends by Lyra Loon. Now this pattern comes with like 6 different friends, I want to say. 3 are a little bit larger and they have where you know, crochet the arms, crochet the legs, and I think they're crocheted in, but I didn't want to go through all of that. I went towards the smaller ones that have like bobble stitches for feet and would just seem to be like quicker makes. So I made a couple of those. This is the first one that I made, and these are hand painted eyes by myself. And I gave him kind of a little smirk. And these do have the functioning hat, which I thought was really cool. So I actually made 2 in that color because I had a partial skein that I used up. So I've got 2 of these guys, and these were made with Premier Parfait Chunky. This is the mauve color, and this is marshmallow. There's a color called mushroom, but to me it gives kind of a dingier look to it. I like the marshmallow color a lot better, so that's what I used for these guys. And these were made with a 5.5mm hook. And then I made another one of the little friends, but I realized once I was already pretty knee deep in the pattern that the hat doesn't do anything. So I was kind of bummed by that. So what I ended up doing was just stuffing it a little bit differently so that it kind of has a little bit of movement, but let me show you what I mean here. So this is the other guy, and this is just made with goblin and marshmallow. Hand painted eyes for him as well. But you know, he doesn't really have the poppable mushroom. This was more of a stiff filled mushroom top. But I gave it a little less so that you could fiddle with it if you wanted to. So I don't know, but I like these guys that have the popping top a lot better. So, oh, in case you're curious, I believe I was charging $30 for these guys at the market last time, and those sold no problem. These guys are new. I'm thinking these are going to be the $12 to $15 range. I haven't quite decided yet. I got to take a look at what my pricing calculation comes up with. The other thing that I made for the toadstool area were some axolotls. I used the No Sew axolotl pattern by Crochet by Jenna, and I just decided to make 4 of those, and I did 1 of each kind of color that I've done before. So I have one in blue on blue, and this is all Bernat blanket 6.5mm hook. The only thing I do is I deviate from the pattern ever so slightly, and I surface crochet these guys on, because doing the color changes just doesn't make sense to me. I can whip through the whole thing and then just surface crochet these guys on. So I have one in the blue, I have one in teal on teal, one in pink on pink, or a mauve pink, and then lilac and purple. And this skein of Bernat is so rough. It is really old. It was one that I got on clearance at Joann's, and it should have been on clearance, but it works for this. So these guys came out cute. Those are my makes for the week. I put a pretty okay dent in the toadstool area, I think. So I'm pretty happy with where I'm at. I got to see what I'm feeling. I think I might lean into the toadstool area a little more with this coming week's makes. I do like that stuff, so we'll see how that goes. But I hope that it was helpful to see my thought process on how I came up with this inventory. I hope it gave you some food for thought on your own inventory and what you're putting out there for your brands. If you have any questions or any feedback, I always love to hear it in the comments down below. If you have not already subscribed, please consider doing so. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you on the next one. Bye.